Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Jane Mudd. I'm the Executive Director of EHCMA, the East Harris County Manufacturers Association. I am so glad that you're here joining us today. EHCMA is a coalition of about 118 plant sites in East Harris County, spanning 7 outreach areas, 10 cities, 3 ports, up and down the ship channel, led by major corporations. In fact, it's one of the largest petrochemical and refining sites in the world. Our member companies make up over 25,000 employees and $12 billion in taxes and capital expenditures, really impacting the economy. So we're very glad you're here today. Our member companies care about how we communicate during a crisis. It's important to all of us that there is a good flow of information between community, industry, and back. So this is our second webinar this year on the topic. In fact, we launched our webinars on a quarterly basis last year, and they are free because we want people to be able, our companies and our other stakeholders, municipalities, partners, to be able to learn, and we grow from each other on these topics. So I would like to ask that everybody put their Zoom on mute. We're trying to stay on top of that, but just in case. And I'd like to share what this one is about today. Some of you already have media relations experience. Some of you are very, very practiced in incident command. Others perhaps not. They are different skill sets. EHCMA has a free in-person workshop, full day, that's happening on April 20th. And by the way, you're invited. But this is a kind of a refresher, a foundation for some on incident command, and a refresher for others so that we can go into that seminar being prepared, or if you're not going to make it to that, just learn new things about crisis communications. We are so fortunate today to have 2 experts in this area, Kara Slaughter with LyondellBasell and Caroline Glennon with Baystar. They will go ahead and share some very helpful information on this topic, and hopefully at the end you'll have some questions. We are going to hold questions till the end. Go ahead though and put them in chat, and we'll share those when the time comes. Thank you so much. I'd like to now hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you for kicking us off, Mary Jane, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I am Caroline and the communications manager here at Baystar, and we're based here in Pasadena, and we manufacture highly customized polyethylene. Just to give you a very quick background about myself, my first introduction to incident response training was when I worked at Chevron North America headquarters. When I was there, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happened, which took quite a few months of effort to support industry resuming deepwater drilling following the moratorium. Later, I went on to the oilfield services side for a company that was trying to get its footing after transitioning from being a family-owned business to a publicly traded company with over 4,000 employees all across the globe. And just a little task while also facing the most extreme oil prices in history. So, and of course, we've all had some crisis response exposure in one way, and that we've experienced COVID-19, both professionally and personally. So that's just a quick bit about my experience in incident response. And we can talk more about that if you have questions on it. But Kara, do you want to give us a little brief background?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Caroline. I'm a communication advisor in global external affairs for LyondellBasell, which is one of the largest plastics, chemicals, and refining companies in the world. I support manufacturing locations along the Gulf Coast. I'm focused on creating the bridge between our corporate company, our manufacturing sites, and then developing that connection between our locations and the communities where we operate. In my role, I engage in a variety of different areas: reputation management, stakeholder engagement, media and stakeholder relations, and of course, crisis and incident management. I have a variety of experiences supporting clients and events, from media trainings and advising councils navigating reputation issues, managing protests on the development of a pipeline, to managing crisis response for manufacturing facilities during the various incidents, including fatalities. Prior to joining LyondellBasell, I worked at a PR firm supporting B2B clients, that business side of things, worked in environment and air quality division for Texas A&M Transportation Institute, it's a mouthful, and worked as a press secretary for a congressman in the House of Representatives. To echo Caroline, I thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can leverage our experiences and knowledge as PIOs to help you leave here today more confident about how you can proactively respond to crisis and feel a little bit more knowledgeable and hopefully learn something new.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. And would you go ahead and go to the agenda slide? Thank you. So you can see we have quite a lot here listed out on topics that we're going to try to cover, and we have a very short time to do it. So we're going to take this brief time that we have together to go about an inch deep on about a mile wide. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Kara. And like Mary Jane, and the next one after that, we don't need to see ourselves again. We're already here. Okay. So as Mary Jane said, this is just an opportunity for us to kind of really just scratch the surface on some of these key takeaways for the role of the PIO. And as such, some of these slides are uncharacteristically dense with a lot of content so that you can use it as a resource later on. But just to start off, during an incident, coordinated and timely communication is critical. So the Department of Homeland Security developed a system, which is called NIMS, for governments and non-governmental organizations to work together to prepare for, prevent, respond to, recover from, and mitigate the effects of incidents. So we're going to dive deeper into that role of the PIO, but just know that the PIO is a key member of the Incident Command System and the Emergency Operations Center. And already we're in alphabet soup, and it doesn't stop there. So you may have heard of a JIC or a JIS, and what does that actually mean? The JIC, or the Joint Information Center, is a physical location where that we use to coordinate critical emergency information, crisis communications, and public affairs. And the Joint Information System, not to be confused, is the structure and the system to operate. So basically, the JIC is where the operations take place, and the JIS is a way of operating. And don't worry, we're going to have a glossary with all these terms at the end, so you can refer back to that. You can go to the next slide, Karen. Thanks. So we'll just start with the procedure. First, in an incident, the Emergency Operating Center is activated. During a severity level 3, 2, or level 1 incident with media coverage, several external notifications need to take place. After the EOC is activated, then the PIO needs to immediately notify either their company headquarters or their direct supervisor, depending on the size and the organization. And then the PIO is going to go about gathering the intel, as much intel as they can about the incident. EHCMA does have an incident assessment report that can be used as a guide. It's a really great toolkit. There are a lot of tools there available. If you don't have access to that, if you're not a member of EHCMA, then you can get synced up with our admin team here at the end of the call and check out the website to learn more, to get access to those materials. But they're very, very helpful, and especially in responding to an incident. I'm not sure if they're going to be, I think they're going to be handed out again at the workshop if you're attending that. But the PIO needs to determine first if there's a probability of media being involved. There is a checklist in that report that you can refer back to, and then determine the staff roles depending on the incident. So at each stage that a determination is made, the communication has to constantly two-way with the company headquarters and direct supervisor so that they stay abreast of the situation. So let's jump into a very high level of the organizational roles. This is just a quick snapshot of the organizational structure and where the PIO fits within that structure. The PIO for Incident Command is responsible for the development and oversight of the internal and external communication plans and is a liaison, as I just mentioned in the last slide. You can go back or go through the NIMS training for more information on how those other roles play in, what they do in comparison, but we're really just focused on PIO for today. So as I said, the very first thing, once the headquarters have already been notified, of the incident is to determine staff roles. And that the great thing about this entire approach is that it's very scalable depending on the size of your organization and the level of the incident. So when I worked at Chevron, we had thousands of employees that one could choose from to delegate these positions to. And at Baystar, we only have about 250 employees. So as you can imagine, just in our day-to-day, we all wear multiple hats. But in the event of an incident, I would need to call on different people who may not be communications to fulfill these roles. So you really want to take a look at the staff roles that are here, and you want to consider the staff that you have and the people that you have available to you when determining these roles. And so those roles, I'll talk a little bit about how you can blend those together. The writer is the person who formulates the information about the incident, which will be released to the employees and the news media and other appropriate agencies. This position obtains information from the PIO and updates media releases, secures required reviews, and make sure that the information is disseminated. They also provide that information to community and government as needed and as appropriate. In short duration incidents, this position also assumes the responsibility of the coordinator. And in larger situations, the coordinator may need to be a separate role. The coordinator interfaces with and releases the information to employees via email, telephone, internet, intranet sites, and social media, as well as to news media and other agencies and audiences, including the Care Online, which we'll talk about more here in a little bit. And if it's a smaller incident, this position may be fulfilled by the writer. So those two could be combined. The runner may or may not need to be staffed. You may not have something where you need someone to be able to provide that support, but that is someone that you would want to consider, especially for a larger incident or an ongoing incident. The media center team is responsible for assimilating the physical needs of on-site media, that collateral. Those positions will be filled in a high exposure or longer term incident, but in other incidents, this would just also be fulfilled by the PIO staff member. And the community relations coordinator, that person is responsible for identifying and responding to community needs and concerns. So again, you can see how the communicator, the community response coordinator, relations coordinator, the writer, how those can be blended together if it's possible to do so, or how you might need to tweeze those out a little bit so that folks can focus on what they need to in a larger incident. Next slide. Okay, so once you have all your roles established and identified, then you need to start preparing holding statements. And there, like I said, there is a wealth of knowledge available in the toolkit that EHCMA has available. But just at a high level, you start with gathering information, of course, and determine who's affected, who cares about this, who needs to know what is happening, find out all the details. When did it happen? Where is it happening? And why do people, why should they care, or why do they care? And then if necessary, then you would prepare for a press conference, which there you need to identify the location. Terry Ammerman has a wonderful training that we did last year, and I believe those resources are also available. Some of them are available on her website. She has a whole lot of experience and knowledge about preparing for press conferences and media. Hopefully you would have media training and spokesperson training before you would ever even come to this. It's something that you certainly would want to have at the top of your list of things to do, so that you can be prepared to develop those materials, that your spokespersons are established. That might not be you, and you may need to have some alternates as well. And you need to be able to, not just in the heat of the moment, identify the location. Those things should already be established well in advance, and where that's going to be and what are the alternates for for those. And that way, when it happens, you can focus on getting those materials and briefing your spokesperson as quickly as possible and ensuring that you're prepared for Q&A. I think with that, I'll go ahead and flip it over to Kara. We're trying to get through a lot of content here.
Thanks, Caroline. So, as you're establishing your teams, some of the things, even before the incident, that you need to be aware of is how to be prepared, right? So not just for the incident itself, but just some different points here that can help you feel more confident when you're going into the actual incident or in a response moment, and something that we typically don't learn about or realize that we're needing until we have to actually respond to something. So just some things that people tend to have to find at the last minute, right? So thinking about a go bag, or NIMS calls it like a go kit, right? So often you think of something that you would need with your personal items in it, right? Extra clothes, or if you have to be out in the facility, your appropriate PPE, just things that you're going to need if you're going to be there, especially in a large incident for multiple days or, a 24-hour period. Whatever you are wearing when you're having to respond may not be the right attire for a press conference or for going out into the field if that's needed, depending on what's happening, right? So your personal go kit. And then things to include in that, things that'll help make you feel more comfortable while you're responding, right? So if you're there for 24 hours, you might want your toothbrush, you might want your glasses, if you wear contacts, things like that, your personal hygiene stuff as well. And then in a PIO kit, things to consider for that are, especially if you're not responding where your normal desk is. So for us, we have a corporate office, right? So I may be sitting at the corporate office, but the response is needed at a site. So I may not have all my normal things just in the office that I take up space in when I'm, in the EOC. So things to include would be, whatever office supplies you might need, extra, chargers for your phone and for your laptop, and any kind of thing you need to plug into that. If you need maps of the area, typically the EOC would have that, but it's always important to come prepared for your own benefit. And then any kind of equipment you need, whether that you're utilizing some kind of camera or tripod, if you're shooting a video of some sort, or you're having to record something, you want to make sure that's stable and not moving as you're moving. If you have we have our work cell phone for us and a personal cell phone, so having both of those and making sure they're ready to go and have the appropriate contacts in them. And then any kind of emergency plans that you need, whether that's in a binder or electronically, which is nowadays preferred. Any kind of communication materials you're going to need. If you have radios, normally the EOC has that if you're responding in the actual EOC. But if there's something that you need to coordinate with your other coworkers, whether you're in a large scale event, you may have people outside of the EOC that are helping support you, and hopefully that is available to you. So however you're going to coordinate with them and meet with them, making sure that you're aware of that and have those tools available to you. When you're going into that response, making sure that you assign roles, like Caroline was mentioning, and creating that team as soon as possible. Understanding the scale of the incident and what the, we'll call it worst case scenario could be, and who you might need to plug in or bring into that, and providing that heads up, especially if it's an incident that's happening outside of your normal operating hours, right? So these never take place in the best moment for us, right? Or the perfect timing. So it's finding out, what's going to work for you whenever it's 3 a.m. and you're having to respond, right? Who are you going to need to bring in? Who can take on, wear multiple hats and help support that? Who's available to do that? Is that bringing, if you're an international company like us, sometimes that middle of the night response is bringing in our colleagues in other parts of the world where it's the middle of their working day for them. And that way we can help, manage that incident and carry that 24-hour process through, giving appropriate breaks to people, during the response period. Working through the logistics and planning space. So that could be making sure that you know where you're going, right? So for us, I oversee multiple sites, so making sure I have the correct address for directing media to whatever part of the space that I need them to be in, right? Or stakeholders, if they're coming out for whatever it may be, right? If we're coordinating with people, giving them the right information, making sure that you know where you're going and where all your different locations are at. And how you're going to get there if something happens or you can't, or there's a road blockade up. It could be things like making sure you have your, you know who you're going to contact if you need translation services or sign language services, or if you need a spokesperson that speaks multiple languages, right? So depending on where you're located will depend on what your needs might be. So here in Texas and in Houston, in an incident, we typically have someone who can answer questions from media in both English and Spanish. In our countries and in our companies' asset locations in other countries, it may be dual language for whatever country that is, right? So making sure that you're aware of who those people you're going to call are, and not going, okay, who can be a translator for us at 3 a.m, right? So understanding what's available to you and who your contacts are going to be. And that kind of leads into the next piece of knowing who your contacts are, reviewing all of your contact lists, whether that be for media, other PIO contacts within your organization, other agencies, if there's whoever you're going to be referring to or reaching out to, whether it be within your site and company or outside in the community, making sure you know their information and make sure that's updated, right? You don't want to be calling the, chief of staff for somebody and they actually left their job, 7 months ago and you didn't know that, right? So just making sure that keeps fresh and updated, and keeping it in both your cell phone and on your computer. Just knowing that sometimes you're going to be using dual devices, if not almost all the time, you'll be using dual devices in a response. And then, of course, as we mentioned before, that messaging, developing that framework as if you can in advance. We have our communication templates in our database for, the different kinds of incidents we could have and what the framework for that response could be. That way you're plugging in information, but also you have somewhere to start and you're not going, okay, we're having this incident, what are we going to say in that moment, right? So wanting to make sure that you have at least some kind of skeleton for that in advance. Going through the different principles when you're actually doing the communication piece, you're going to want to make sure you remember a few of these. It's helpful if you just kind of incorporate those into your talking points or into the language that you're using to speak, and remember that in this moment when you're having an incident, it's not necessarily about you, even though it very much feels that way. Everyone's coming to this situation with different feelings and different experiences and different concerns, right? So your concern in the company is going to be very different from your fence line neighbor or from an agency or from a key stakeholder, right? You're going to have, if it's a large scale event, you're going to have an elected official calling you saying, what's going on? I have people in my district that are asking questions. So, and it sometimes can feel very much like people are coming at you in that moment. And there's a lot of, emotions that run very high. So these principles are really critical to help making sure that you stay in control of your narrative and you stay in control of your emotions and how you react and how you respond. Because while it is an incident, that kind of says, oops, sorry. Okay. I scrolled on accident. My goodness. Here we go. How you react and how you respond, even though it's in an incident, is going to kind of set that tone and narrative for the confidence that they can have in you, for their trust in you. And then after the incident, you still have a relationship with those people. So whatever you do in a reactive hot moment is going to impact that down the road, of course. So, expressing empathy, acknowledging that they're, there's a lot of feelings and different emotions that are going on during an incident. Being helpful, you're providing, when your communication, what are you providing them information wise, right? Are you giving them up-to-date information on the incident? Are you, making it an intentional conversation with them versus just, chatting through something, right? You want to make sure that you're helping them with whatever their needs are as best you can during a response. Using plain language, if you are, many of us, I'm assuming, are all in some kind of a role that has us using a lot of different jargon, right? So even in this presentation, we were like, oh, we actually used jargon. We need to put a glossary at the back of that, right? So especially in the manufacturing space, you're going to have, whether it be on the chemicals or the process or the operations, there's going to be lots of different terminology that we use, in everyday conversations that are not going to be digestible or understood by the general public or by the stakeholders. You're using technical terms that may not relate to them, or they may not be simplified enough. So making sure you in advance even know how you're going to break that down and explain what you're talking about. When you say that there's a process upset, well, what does that mean? It's that too complicated of language can become scary for people, right? So using that plain language, avoiding cliches. We often have sympathetic phrases that we use in a statement to sound more sympathetic to the situation. And sometimes those get overused, especially if you're developing multiple statements in an ongoing instance. So if you're just posting it, it sometimes can take out the tone and the intention behind it. And if you're saying it, people can see that you're conveying that empathy for the situation, but just be mindful of what kind of added language you're using in those statements to make sure they're not something people are going to scoff at or roll their eyes at because they've heard it, a dozen times, right? If there's action that needs to be done, making sure you share that, and especially share that up front. Don't bury that in the situation. When you talk about building that statement, you're building it out, telling them what's going on, and then if there's action that needs to be taken, you're saying that before you get to the supporting language of that, right? So you're wanting to make sure that people know if they need to do something, they need to do it sooner rather than later. Being respectful of course, of the people who you're talking with, the opinions. Everyone's coming to that, like I said earlier, with their own perspective. And it's not a personal thing to you, but everyone has their experience and what they think is they know about the situation or the organization or the industry, right? So they're going to have their opinions in a crisis. They're going to express that more than ever before. So making sure that you stay away from that emotionally charged language for yourself. And also your tone and how you carry the conversation. And then promoting that collaboration, right? Especially not only within your own team, but if there's opportunity to collaborate and work together with other agencies or industry or the community. Are there people in the community that are advocates in their community that can help disseminate your message, right? We are many of us are involved in community advisory organizations, CAPS, if you will, and they're very critical in not only having that relationship outside of an incident and crisis, but also helping to disseminate a message to a broad community and making sure that people get that information relatively quickly. So making sure you have that collaborative piece is really critical here. Forward. On the media relations space, as a PIO, establishing that relationship prior to an incident is always a better option than trying to meet your media contacts in the middle of a response, right? They're more likely to come to you with questions if you have that relationship with them, and that's what your hope is, versus reactively asking you questions after they've already posted or published whatever story they're going to run, and seeing if you're going to respond during the middle of the incident or even afterwards. So having that relationship is really critical. Things that you can do to help establish that, create and maintain, of course, that contact list, including those after hours information, right? So how are you going to get a hold of them when it is a 3 a.m. incident? Verifying their credentials before the incident or event, right? So if there's some process that you have with your security desk, if you're going to bring them in, if your plan is to bring them into a specific space within the fence line or within your building, what is that process going to need to look like to make sure that there's no hold up, with getting them access into the appropriate area. Then, and even on your own personal side, make sure that you have the appropriate credentials to get into the EOC and into the response space during an incident, right? That's equally important. Initiating any kind of access that they're going to need to have, if depending on what's going on, likely you're not going to want them to bring them around to different places in a large scale event, but depending on what's going on, you may have to put them in a specific area or secure space. Keeping them aware of any kind of preparedness or campaigns that you have going on, just inviting them into the conversation in those normal day-to-day times, right? Inviting them to see, it's not even just for media contacts, right? But also for your stakeholders, inviting them to see, have that conversation and open the door for what the response looks like, what you're navigating, because then they have a better understanding of what's going on and can appropriately ask the right questions, but also can hopefully help steer the narrative in the correct way, depending on what they're saying, right? So making sure that you've established that space. And then, if there's any kind of drill or exercise that you can engage your stakeholders or the media with, including them in that, makes you just have a better relationship with them and be able to give them a perspective of a response that they may not always have. And we talked about this a little bit earlier and just kind of throughout the conversation, but your contacts that you're having in a crisis are probably the ones you should have I know this list probably expands outside of the crisis space for your normal day-to-day operations, but these are the key areas of people you want to make sure you have at least an active media and contact list for, and then also have those relationships with as many times as you can help establish those different touch points and have those intentional conversations when it's a calm period and there's no crisis or incident happening. That's even better, right? So from the community, it's of course your fence line neighbors, then beyond that to your 3-mile radius, any kind of association that's critical in your community. If you have a community advisory organization of some sort, and of course the media contacts going through government. If you're a large scale organization, you may have government relation colleagues that will help manage that state and federal, making sure that you've talked with them in advance to figure out who's responding to what, how are we going to handle inquiries that come in, how are we going to be aware of what's happening, because they may respond to a federal inquiry, but it's still important as the PIO for you to know that those are happening, because that may generate additional coverage or conversation from your local stakeholders. Make sure you have those relationships, of course, with the mayor and the city and the county. If you're in Harris County, then that's your county officials, especially the fire marshal and your Office of Emergency Management, and for Harris County and your local Office of Emergency Management. Those are going to be really critical in that response space to make sure you're communicating appropriately. They feel confident in that communication, and they know from knowing you that they can be confident in the response and how you're going to handle managing that with the community. And oftentimes, if you're in Harris County, when it comes to an incident, that press conference space, at least from personal history, Harris County is going to be the one who will likely want to hold a press conference or will encourage that if they're responding to the incident. So that collaboration is critical in advance, because if you're going to jointly have a press conference, then you'll know, what your plan of action is going to be, who's going to take what role during that time without having to figure it out on the spot. Caroline mentioned it, teased it a little bit briefly earlier, but we talked about two of our, emergency notification systems. The main one for our manufacturing sites being e-Notify, right? This is a requirement by EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and this is our notification that industry that provides updates and awareness to industry and agencies. This, used to have a call system for both types of emergency notification, but that obviously has now gone to an online system. Moving into our digital space. And so this is usually done required to be done within the first 15 minutes of an incident. Once they have created that e-Notify, that can generate an auto message that it auto fills out a message that they can choose to submit or create their own message for the CARE line, which is the Community Awareness Emergency Response online system that provides the same or similar notification to community about any kind of incident or planned event. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a crisis or an incident when they use CARE. It's usually used for that, but it can also be like if there's a drill happening or you've had a medical response effort, right? That's not necessarily a crisis. There's not going to be any kind of incident happening, but someone has, become dehydrated or whatever, ambulance needs to be on site, right? Which has happened before, depending on the severity of the situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're responding to an incident in like a full EOC crisis space, right? So there's different kinds of notifications that will occur if you have flaring, different kinds of trainings or drills, and just making people aware of what's going on if they see something that's abnormal activity. Again, also within the first 15 minutes is preferred and taken as a requirement now. It's pretty critical to our response efforts. And then those things are very similar, but there's sometimes language that's used in e-Notify for agency as required that you're not necessarily putting in CARE, because you again need to break that down into the appropriate language for the audience and to provide the appropriate level of information. And then there's aftermath, right? So oftentimes when you have an incident, you'll have something happen and then it concludes, and then you have that wrap up period, and the site your operations may have some period of time for that wrap up, but they also eventually go back to business as usual or status quo, and then in that next recovery phase of things, depending on what's going on. For us, you have the aftermath of the response, right? So it doesn't just end the moment we no longer have a active standing EOC or crisis management team. If you have a corporate office, that also means for us, when the incident technically is over, you have ongoing inquiries that potentially come through and likely come through on a large scale event. You have updates that you need to provide to your community members and your key stakeholders. Probably the most critical thing is providing that after action with your stakeholders. So not only internally, right, you typically will have some kind of lessons learned period with your team or with the site to figure out what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve on, what can we put in place so that we don't have a hiccup for the next time on certain things, but also with your local, response. If there's people involved in that conversation, if Harris County is responding and you have to do a joint press conference and, you have some bumps that happen in the middle of it, well, let's talk about that in that post after action space and figure out, how can we make this smoother for the next time? What can we do differently? How can we be more collaborative and work better together? So there's a lot that is done in our role post event in that aftermath space. And sometimes there's frequent updates that you're still putting out there, whether that be on some kind of response website, which is what we use, or directly to your stakeholders or your contacts at media. And then just making note of the fact that anytime you have agency response that's happening, so there's documentation submitted, like for CSB, for example, the Chemical Safety Board, that anytime they make their final report and that official documentation, that's put into a public space, so anybody can look at that and see it, and that usually will trigger some kind of community or media question or response and kind of pull back up everything that happened, right? Because it's a different person commenting on the event or providing an update perhaps on the event, or their update on what they consider actually happened. Sometimes legal action is happening with certain people involved in the event. So anytime a case has been, come to a resolution, that can spark any inquiries with the community or with media, especially if it's pretty public. So just being prepared for that, those potential things that may come down the road, being aware of what could come up and know what kind of statement and plan you're going to have in place to deal with those events. And then if depending on what kind of incident you have, there may be some rebuilding of the relationships that needs to occur, right? So you may have people who are deeply impacted by what happened, and you have work to do to reestablish that bridge and rebuild that connection that you have with them, and help maybe manage whatever happened for future, so that there's not so that they can have that trust in you again and you can rebuild that. And then of course, as Caroline mentioned before, that was kind of our last main content slide for the actual PIO training piece. But then we have the workshop coming up, as we've talked about previously. On this slide, you have the agenda for what you can expect, what's going to happen. There's going to be different panel discussions, a guest speaker during the lunch, some breakout time, working through different drills or trainings. Definitely a lot of great bits of information and nuggets and things that you can learn and take away for your personal experience in PIO for your company and whatever role that you have, and be able to help develop that at your own company, and be able to manage response and incident in a more proactive and knowledgeable way. That way you feel fully equipped whenever you're responding, because you can prepare so much, but the more you prepare, the more prepared you're going to feel in the middle of that moment, right? So preparation is key for how you deal with anything, and that's something that we drill in with our media trainings, of course, as well. If you're going to speak publicly, you want to make sure that you've prepared well in advance. You practice in front of the mirror multiple times. Same thing with being a PIO, right? The more you prepare, the more drills you run, the more practice you have, the more learnings like this that you participate in, the better you're going to feel during an incident. Because hopefully, and fortunately, we don't have to do this every single day, have an incident or crisis response. So sometimes you go long periods between your actual response efforts. So it's always something that you need to brush up those skills on, right? And make sure that you're prepared even in those calm periods, because you don't know when the next thing's going to happen, but hopefully it's happening, few and far between. But always make sure that you're prepared for that. So we hope that you'll join us on the 20th for the workshop. Excited to see hopefully many of you face to face and get to meet you in person if we haven't met before. I included at the end, or we included at the end, a resource slide. Of course, EHCMA has, if you're a member, EHCMA has a portal and the page for all kinds of resources. Caroline mentioned some of the templates or documents that you can use if you need access to those. If you don't have access, of course, please connect with the admin team who's on this call to help get that established. But then here's some resources that we have that you can see whether you're a member or not, but also even if you've had a PIO training from your company, these are good refreshers. NIMS really puts out a great PDF guidance for PIOs. It is a step-by-step every category you could possibly imagine with quite a bit of detail. So if you need a reference guide in the moment and you need to Control F to find something specific, you can do that in that PDF. It is there. And the Emergency Management Institute also offers, through FEMA, offers quite a lot of trainings but online, in person, and just different opportunities to get specific training in certain areas, overall PIO training, emergency management training. So you can feel fully equipped in whatever your needs are and your levels of experience with the PIO are. There's a bunch of different resources that you can access, both through your company and otherwise, that'll help you feel more prepared. And now I'll turn it over to questions.
You guys, this has been great. I so appreciate it. I have seen a couple things pop up on chat, and we do have a few minutes. First, I want to mention that Gemily Perez, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, kindly raised her hand to let us know that she is the communications specialist and PIO for the Harris County Fire Marshal's Office. And if anybody wants to connect with her, she has provided her contact information. So thank you. That's what these things are all about. It starts here. So thank you for that. Okay, we did receive a question from Philip Arroyo. It's a worst case scenario question, okay? So in an event that has led to a fatality, would you use social media to communicate that there has been a fatality if you are not yet prepared for press conference? Or do you go ahead and put it out over your official social media and further expand on it when the time for the press conference comes? So do you hold on to the information, or do you share it when you're ready to do the press conference? So it continues, for example, keep it silent until press conference or report it out and expand during the conference. So which way would you go on that if there is a fatality?
I would say we could probably both talk to this a little bit. So Caroline, correct me if you feel differently on some things related to this, but in my experience, with the last, the only fatality incident that I've worked on, I guess I'm feeling now, but I would say it depends on how your company uses their messaging. The way that we handled it initially was we developed a holding statement. You're going to get, based off of care notification, and you notify, you're going to get inquiries and stuff from media. That's going to come well in advance of press conference and that, especially in that incident, especially when you're first responding and you're not quite ready to hold a press conference. So you're going to have a holding statement that happens. Knowing the severity of the situation, we activated what we call our dark site, which is a response site that we have. It's geared for us to be able to put all of our statements onto one website, any information about the location, depending on what facility it's at, how they can get a hold of media, and it's how we manage all of the inquiries that come in from that site, but also, logging all the different pieces that have come out, keeping up to date with all of our talking points, things like that. So in that response, we're going to develop the first statements and then the further statements, depending on the incident, and utilize the site to post there. So I would recommend utilizing your social media in a way that drives people back to that site so they can get frequent updates. So you're not utilizing your social media platform to provide all the incident updates, because depending on how severe, especially in this case of a fatality, you may have, in our instance, we had probably 8 or 9 different statements that came out, multiple that come out in the first, week or so, post after action of the actual event. And the day of, you may have 3 or 4, depending on what happens. And the week of, you may have another update. But then in the months prior, you're going to have updates as you've navigated the situation. If there's anything that's, we're starting up the unit again, whatever's going on. So you're going to have questions and statements that may come out afterwards. And you don't want to use your social media, in my perspective, to keep reminding people of that afterwards. If you can direct them to that response site, if they're interested in getting updates and staying regularly engaged, they can do that there, and they can sign up for notifications if you post anything there. And then simultaneous with the press conference, you plug the response site at the press conference if you have something like that. If you don't, wherever you're going to be, if there's a contact or a place that you're going to have your response and your statements to be posted or shared, if they need to contact you, you want to kind of manage that though if you're saying that publicly. So just know that if you do say that publicly, you're going to get lots of questions and things coming to your phone, right? So that's how we handle that. Caroline.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Caroline.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Philip, thanks for that question. It's a very good question, especially highlighting the fact that we do need to be focused on social media activity. You do need to have a voice on social media, depending on what that is, that incident is. But I would never use social media to share that kind of information. And that goes back to what Kara was talking about as far as those principles, those communications principles. So imagine if you are a family member and you find out from Facebook that there's been a fatality at your spouse's site, but you don't know who it is. That would cause a lot more alarm than I think it would do good. And it really it takes away that ability to show the true empathy and concern that you have, where you can do that better in a press conference. So just keep that in mind. But that said, I totally 100% agree with Kara. Use that social media platform to continue to drive back and to your press conference that you're planning to have. Let them know that as soon as information is available, that it will be on the website if you have that dark site. But I would not share information like that on social media. But I think that's a really good point to bring up, that you do need to have an active monitoring system, have that coordinator or someone else that you've delegated the responsibility of making sure that you hear what people are saying, what questions are coming up, and have your ear to the ground there.
I would just to add one thing to that, though, I would also say identifying whether not every single incident and crisis necessarily requires or should have a press conference, right? Some things do need a press conference, but not every single thing is a press conference, right? So if you're going to have a press conference, let's say in the instance of a fatality, depending on how your organization typically works, you may end up holding a press conference, a little ways into the event when it's appropriate to provide that kind of update. But you probably won't be doing a press conference every time you have an update, right? That'd be quite a few press conferences. So understanding if you're going to have a press conference, where are you going to direct people to find the next update? Because your incident may conclude, and then a few days later, it would be awkward to provide a press conference, post action, when nothing visible is happening. There's no one on site necessarily anymore. There may be some people still from agency perspective, but you're not going to just call a press conference every time you want to say a statement. So if you're going to have a press conference, during that incident at some point, figuring out in advance where you're going to send people to get the next update, who they can contact, if it's your media line or your media inbox, if they have questions, if you have a response site, but making sure you don't put in place that they can expect all of their updates from multiple press conferences. If it's appropriate, of course, do so, but most of the time you're not going to have just a bunch of press conferences. So just figuring out where you're going to send people for their updates.
I'd like to add too, in East Harris County, most likely, if there is an unfortunate incident, and following on the collaborative point that you made earlier, most likely the press conferences would be along with Precinct 2 Commissioner, Fire Marshal's office, and so forth. And as Kara said, not every situation requires that. Here's a question: should the social media contact be separate from on-site PIO?
We're an extensive organization, so we have a very large public affairs team. So we have a digital and social team that manages that. If you look at the ICS organization structure, identifying in advance who would fulfill what roles during an incident response, and that's through NIMS, of course. So identifying who would be your social media monitor person, who's going to be responsible for seeing what the narrative is out there, what the sentiment is. So I would have that be separate, because if you're in the EOC on site, if you ever have an opportunity to run the drill of the EOC and role play an actual incident and how that response works. It's a small taste for what it will be like in an actual EOC. There's a lot going on, and you have a lot of responsibility to, depending on the scale of the incident, to, you know, getting the updates from the team out in the field, getting the updates from other people in the EOC, relaying those to whoever else can help you in that PIO space, identifying if you have media at the gate or on site, right? There's just maybe a lot going on, and monitoring social media is a challenge to do that, and all of the stuff you're going to need to do while you're an active PIO in the EOC. So yes, I would have the social media person be separate. I would even have, if you have the capability from your organization's size perspective, I would even have your, you know, media monitoring person be separate. You know, at one point we were monitoring, you know, Houston area has lots of different channels, right? So we had assigned people like, okay, you're going to watch KPRC, you're going to watch KHOU because you're expecting different updates, but I can't physically watch 5 different TV screens. Okay, that'd be a lot of TV screens in my house, right? So, or in my office even. So making sure you have people who can be assigned to own that part, and making sure you're specific about, you know, Steve, this is your responsibility, or like, you're going to be our social media monitor. Can you please develop this material? That way there's a clear intention behind the communication, and they know their responsibility during that response.
I would, the only thing I would add there, I think, yes, you can, it's an easy job that you can delegate out to someone else who is not a communications person, that they could be monitoring social media. So definitely try to delegate that if you can. It's like, as Kara said, it's just a lot of work to try to keep up with. But with that, also prepare them. So have the, as we talked about earlier, having those key contacts also relates to social media. So you want to tell them where to be looking for those posts. Who are those key members, those key sites, those key influencers that you want to make sure that your social media contact person is monitoring those. If you don't have a media monitoring, a social media listening tool that you're already using, many companies do, where you can calculate you can populate some keywords that will return any kind of posts about that subject. But short of having a more sophisticated listening system in place for the company, then definitely have someone that you've appointed, make sure you're checking these different places, just like Kara said, as far as saying, hey, you know, you be watching channel 2 and you be watching, you know, the news on channel 4, whatever it is, so that you're delegating that out too.
The great thing about incident command, in my view, is you've got your role, and it's important that you avoid stepping out of that role, or else it, you know, won't work as well. So once you're assigned to something, that's what you do, and you do it as best as you can. You keep your ego at the door, and you work on behalf of the team. So that's just something that's always worked so beautifully. Do we have any more questions? We're coming up toward 11. Is there anything else? Our speakers did comment about the April 20th free workshop. And I want to mention, you know, it's our view that it's just important for us to come together. By us, I mean communicators who work across all functions and organizations. The planning team comprises different organizations. We've got Lyondell-Basell, we've got Baystar, our municipalities, emergency responders, because in the case of an incident, we will be working together. And Kara and Caroline have spoken so well about the importance of collaboration. The free workshop does offer crisis scenarios where you really drill down in a time-limited way, kind of experience some of the stress you might if there is an incident. Beyond Precinct 2 opening it for us, we also have a number of subject matter experts like Kara and Caroline, who will be in panel discussions. Terry Ammerman, legendary media trainer of the Ammerman Group, will be offering some media training for those who are interested as well. So it's really a great program. And again, it's free because all of us care. Oh, no question, just a comment. Oh, well, isn't this nice? Excellent presentation, very insightful. Looking forward to the workshop on the 20th. That's from Lauren Gonzalez. So see you guys, you did a great job, but that's not a surprise. So again, we've talked about the workshop. It is at Lyondell Basell's CPET building. And I don't like acronyms, but I always forget this one. It's terrible. Okay, the Center for Petrochemical Energy and Technology, CPET, at San Jacinto College. And if you're interested, just go to EHCMA.org. That's EHCMA.org. You have to register. And otherwise, I just want to thank our speakers for working so hard on this presentation, sharing this information. We have recorded it. If you wish to receive the recording, follow up with us or let me know, and we'll be sure. Okay, so I'm getting a note. The recording and slides will be sent out to all participants soon. Okay, and you're welcome to share it. Thank you again for a great program, for being here today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.